Hey guys, this is Alana with Her Home and Harvest. We are going to spend some time cleaning up my back hill and my patio garden to get it ready for the 2022 garden season. I'm sorry to say this project took me all of January. I'm now filming this intro in February. I just did a few last touch-ups and started my seeds, which is in another video. I'll link that down in the description box if you want to check that out. But yeah, I hope you'll enjoy and maybe be motivated by seeing what I did to get my garden started for this year. All right, we are just gonna dive right in and start off with me pruning my rose bushes. This is a great place to start this video because this is how I started learning how to prune. When we bought this house, these rose bushes were already there. They were pretty unruly when I got there, sort of like they are right now. This is after a year of me not pruning, so I don't know how long it had been since the previous owners had pruned them. They grow pretty vigorously in this yard, and so I have had a lot of freedom to prune them back and make a ton of mistakes doing it. This has taught me so much. While pruning them, I have been able to see the benefits and just simply what it means to cut on an outward bud, to cut at a 45-degree angle, to cut to allow more airspace, airflow, remove crossing branches, all of the things that you learn as you're learning how to prune. These rose bushes were the perfect canvas for me to learn on for a few reasons. One, I didn't plant them, so I'm not emotionally invested in their success. I mean, I love them. I do love roses, but I probably wouldn't have chosen roses to put here because one, they're thorny, and in the future, I'm going to have to deal with kids and thorny rose bushes. And two, I probably would have used this space for more vegetable gardening, but they're already here. They draw in pollinators wonderfully. And like I said, I've learned so much in pruning them. So this is just a great place to get this video started. I probably could have pruned these rose bushes a little more heavily this year, but I cut so much back that I decided to just stop here. Now I'm pruning my peach trees. These are two trees planted in the same hole. It's a method called high density planting, which I learned from Dave Wilson Nurseries on YouTube. There are plenty of other resources out there about doing this. That's just where I learned about it. It's where you take two trees. As far as I know, you want them to be of the same variety. So in my case, two trees of the same variety. You can even do it with 3 or 4. And you plant them in the same hole and you kind of treat them like one tree. So that way you can get 2 varieties in the same space as one tree. You could also achieve this by grafting, but I have no experience with grafting and I just wasn't confident that I could keep a graft alive. And so I decided to go with this. In the future, I may decide to graft onto these trees, but for now, this is what I've done. So I've got 2 peach trees here, an Eva's Pride on the left and an August Pride on the right. And I am just cutting back anything that is growing directly upward, growing inward, any branches that are growing directly underneath another branch so they won't get any light. I left some branches on that I probably shouldn't have, but I figured I wanted to get the fruit production off of them. I was being a little bit greedy, and I can always cut them back next year, or I can cut them back if I see them being a problem during the summer. That's what I did last year. These fruit trees have been in the ground since February of 2020. So I've got 2 citrus trees, 2 peach trees, 2 apple trees, 2 pluot trees, and 2 avocados that were all planted in early spring of 2020. Okay, I'm doing the same thing with the pluots now, just opening up the centers and taking off anything that is growing straight up or crossing any branches or anything that I see that is potentially diseased or damaged. I have a good example of what I'm talking about. I was deciding between branches and to take off, and this popped up. And so I don't know if this is disease, but it definitely is damaged, so I removed it. I was debating between which branch to cut off, and when I spotted that, it made it an easy decision. I just went ahead and took that off. I'm learning that in pruning, as with most things in the garden and honestly in life, there are some very good ways to do things and there are some very bad ways to do things, but most of the way you're going to do things lies somewhere in the middle there. Pretty much everything I do back here, it's a learning process. I learn more and more every year in my garden, and I really enjoy just the process of experimenting and discovering new things and just learning how to do things better or different, or just kind of playing around. I find it as kind of a creative outlet, and I also just really enjoy learning new things, and so there's so many things to learn that every year I discover something new, and I love sharing that information with others too. So I have almost got the weeds in my backyard under control, but these are the stuff that cropped up over winter, which typically isn't when we get the most weeds. But there's weed tarp on my back hill. It's actually all that black stuff that you see is weed tarp. I haven't figured out how to cover it, but at this point it's helping keep my weeds away, and that's the biggest thing that I care about. I really hate weeds. I don't know too many people that enjoy them, but there is something really satisfying about getting a weed out all the way from the root. And so let me know if I'm the only weird one out there that really enjoys pulling out weeds. Well, I will say, okay, I don't always enjoy it because sometimes I can't get the root out, and then it's not as satisfying. My goal is not to have the most beautiful, perfect garden. I am just trying to enrich my life through a hobby and through eating good, healthy food, and hopefully having something that my family and I can enjoy together. And in the future, something that my kids and I can enjoy growing together. But trying to get this to be perfect isn't a goal, because as much as I like things tidy and I like things to look pretty, if I try to make this look like the perfect backyard and the perfect garden, it just ends up making it a chore. And I don't want this to be a chore. I want this to be something that I enjoy. Now I am pulling out the weeds from my vegetable garden. I started this vegetable garden along the bottom portion of my hill at the same time that we put in the trees. So in spring of 2020, these bottom 2 feet have been great. I mean, it's basically a raised bed. The retaining wall was already here when we got the house, and I didn't want to plant trees close to it because I didn't want to deal with roots, and I knew I wanted a vegetable garden, and I'm not mentally prepared to rip out the grass yet, so I just turned this whole bottom section into my vegetable garden. This year will be the first year that I'm actually going to use the space directly behind these rose bushes, and we're all gonna go on that adventure and see how that goes, gardening directly behind rose bushes. I've got caught on them a couple of times, and that was after I pruned them back, so I don't know how that's gonna go. In addition to the bottom of this hill that I'm using for my vegetable garden, I also use the patio, and I have maybe plans for putting a couple raised beds in my backyard where the grass is. There's plenty of extra space back here, but I haven't been able to make up my mind about that, because I know, one, that my kids will enjoy being able to play in the grass, but two, that if I do that, I'm gonna have to think about like the long term when it comes to, I don't think we're gonna be in this house forever, and I don't know if it's a good idea to rip out large portions of the grass. So I would love to, but I just haven't brought myself to make the decision to do that yet. This part of my garden is still growing things this year. As you can see, I've got this turnip, which I was super proud of. I've never grown turnips before, and a friend gave me seeds. I plopped them in the ground, and yeah, I ended up really liking them, so I will grow them again in the future. And then I also have green onion, cilantro, parsley, and some kale there you see on the bottom. That's kale on the very bottom, and the rest of that is weeds. So these weeds, as much as this area gets so many weeds, it's also the easiest area to weed because it's usually the most moist, because every time the sprinklers kick on, a little bit of water comes out of the valves, and every time it kicks off. Now that I've removed most of the weeds, I'm getting in here and prepping the soil that in the beds that I used last year, just pulling out all of the irrigation that I had last year. This is just a drip irrigation that I set up myself, and I'm going to have to redo it this year because it is set up for the plants that I had in there before, and it's not quite what I need for the plants that I plan on planting this year. So I really needed to get in here and mix in the soil. This particular portion of the hill, I had mixed in some potting mix and some garden soil that I just bought from a local nursery and mixed it directly into my native soil, which is really heavy compacted clay soil. And it's still got a lot of clay in it, but it is so much better than it was before. And so I did that back in 2020. And so it's been 2 years now, and the soil is so much easier to work with. I know it doesn't look super easy, but when we first were digging into this hill, we could not get that shovel in. I mean, my husband was jumping on top of the shovel and barely able to get it into the soil. And so the fact that I can just kind of tap it in with my foot now, it's so much easier. And so this year I'm mixing in some more. There's some compost on the top there, and I have a little bit more garden soil that I plan on mixing in, but I think this soil is pretty good in this bed. So we've almost made it to where I'd like to be. I realize in hindsight that I should have pulled the mulch off of the top of this before I started doing this, but it's fine. It will eventually break down. And then of course every year I'm going to add in more organic matter, so compost. I'm a big fan of worm castings, and I use granular slow release fertilizers. All right, so this is the patio garden I was telling you guys about. You can't see all of the pots here. There's a few behind this planter, and a few that I've emptied since last summer. But I'm just coming in here and cleaning all this up. This big planter in the front here was actually made from 2 light fixtures from when we first bought the house. These, there were 2 light boxes in our kitchen that had those old school fluorescent lights in them, and we pulled them out, and I decided, you know, that's like the perfect size for a planter, and so I made it into one, but it is falling apart, and it's time to go. It doesn't look so great anymore. But I'm not going to waste the soil. The soil I have in here is really good soil, and I amend it every year. So don't throw your soil away. You can keep that soil and use it next year. You just need to add some form of, or some nutrients back into it, whether that's compost, some sort of organic matter, or earthworm castings, or just worm castings work really great for adding nutrients back into potting soil. For me, I don't know if it's just my particular garden or what, but when I added worm castings into my pots on my patio, they're now a bunch of worms. Like, there's worms in this soil, and so I'm not going to throw it away. I want to use it. However, there was so much more soil than I thought there was going to be, and so I'd only planned on filling about 5 or 6 containers, and it ended up filling up so much more, and so I pulled out just about every pot that I could. I found those hanging baskets that I've always wanted to use, and I don't know what I'm going to plant in them, but I am determined to plant something in them this year. So anyway, this planter took me quite a bit of work to break down, but I was able to do it on my own. I built this on my own too. It's just the 2 light boxes are just screwed together, and then I put some beams across the bottom, or some boards across the bottom with chicken wire on the top, and then I put in weed tarp to hold in the soil, and that worked really, really well for me. Almost all of my best performing plants were in this planter, so I'm hoping to replace this with a new planter this year. We shall see what we can find. Even though I have all the space in my back hill to grow my fruits and vegetables, I still use my patio, and I will continue to use my patio. I love the convenience of it, especially for things like herbs where you can just walk outside and grab one and go back in. So even if I end up on my dream property of many acres, I will always have a patio garden. I started gardening on my patio before we moved to this house. We lived in a tiny little 600 square foot apartment. Well, I guess it was a townhome, but that's where I got the gardening bug, and it has been something that I've enjoyed doing since. So I will always have my little patio garden. It'd be nice if I could get it to look nicer, but the problem is every time I get a new pot, I just want to fill it, and so it gets cluttered really quickly. But when it's covered in plants, it's at least pretty to look at. So I'm excited for what I have planned for this year. I will show you guys what I'm doing, and yeah, we'll see what we can grow on this patio. If you want to know what's here right now, there's a couple of peppers in the back there. There is some peas that are almost ready to be pulled out, and some oregano and a pineapple. This pineapple I have been growing for 2 years now. I think I planted it in 2019. Oh, I guess this would be its 3rd year then. Yeah, I planted it back in 2019 from the top of a pineapple that my neighbor grew. And I have not gotten a pineapple yet. I don't know too much about pineapples, but I'm either doing something wrong. I know they say it can take 3 years, but this would be my 3rd year. So if it doesn't fruit by this year, I'm not sure I'm gonna keep this thing. So if you know anything about pineapple, please let me know. So I'm very happy to be done with this project, and I can't wait to share what's coming up next. This is just a little clip of what it looks like after I cleaned up. I really appreciate you joining me in the garden as I prep it for this year. If you want to see what happens and grows throughout the year, click the subscribe button. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up.